The moment my parents demanded my penthouse at my sister's wedding, I knew I couldn't let it slide. They had crossed a line, but what happened next would change everything. I set the stage for the wedding day with excitement. Everything was meticulously planned. My sister Rachel's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. The whole family gathered at the venue, the atmosphere buzzing with joy, the champagne flowing, and the air filled with love. But something was off. My parents, David and Sarah, were already making their usual remarks about the extravagant details. They never seemed to appreciate anything I did unless it served them in some way. That day was no different. It was just before the reception, when the guests were mingling, and I was talking to Rachel when David suddenly appeared at my side, pulling me aside. "Jenna, you know that penthouse of yours? We were thinking it'd be perfect for us during the next few weeks. The view is amazing, and we could really use the space. What do you think?" His voice was smooth, almost too smooth. My mind raced. I tried to hide my confusion, but my stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I felt my heart beating faster in my chest. "Well, you know, you're not using it right now. With all the space here, we thought it'd be a good fit for us." My eyes flicked over to Sarah, who stood nearby, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. My jaw tightened as the words sank in. They were asking me for my penthouse, my home, the place I had worked so hard for. It wasn't just about the place itself, but about the audacity. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice calm but firm. David's expression shifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected any resistance. He tried again, his voice smoother now, almost condescending. "Come on, Jenna. It's just a place. You're hardly there anyway. We're family. It'll be fine. Besides, Rachel and I could really use the change of scenery." Rachel, my sister Rachel, who had been nothing but a pawn in their manipulative games for years. It was all becoming too clear to me now. My mind flashed back to the countless times they had taken advantage of my kindness, my generosity, and now they were asking for my home, as if it was just something I owed them. The tension in my chest grew, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I looked at my father and calmly said, "I don't think it's appropriate for you to take my place, Dad. I've worked hard for that. And frankly, I'm not sure why you think this is okay." David's face hardened, but Sarah chimed in, almost with a fake sweetness that made my blood run cold. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. It's not a big deal. Think of it as a family favor. You're not using it, so why not share?" Her words felt like daggers to my heart. The wedding I had spent months preparing for was suddenly turning into a battlefield. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just about the penthouse. It was about them feeling entitled to everything I had worked for. It was about their complete disregard for my feelings. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the one they expected to bend to their whims. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. My grandmother Maggie had always warned me about them, about how they could manipulate, control, and take without thinking twice. I never listened until now. As the evening went on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their demands lingering over me, the joy of my sister's wedding overshadowed by this selfish request. But then, Maggie, my grandmother, walked into the scene, her presence like a breath of fresh air amidst the tension. She didn't say much, but her eyes locked onto me. She could see the turmoil in me, the conflict I was trying to suppress. Maggie had never been one for words, but when she did speak, it was always a truth that hit hard. As I turned to her, she gave me a small nod, almost as if to say, "You know what to do." And just like that, I knew this wasn't the end. This wasn't just a battle over a penthouse. This was a moment where I had to finally take control. They wouldn't get away with this. Not again. But how would I make them understand? How could I stop them from taking more than they already had? Little did they know, this wedding wouldn't be the only thing they'd remember from this day. My grandmother's words were more than just a hint. They were a warning. And I would make sure they understood that no one could walk over me anymore. Not even my own parents. As the evening continued, I could feel the weight of my parents' demands hanging over me like a dark cloud. I forced myself to smile, to engage in the usual wedding chatter, but inside, my mind was racing. I tried to push the thoughts of the penthouse out of my head, to focus on my sister's big day, but the conversation kept pulling me back. I could feel David and Sarah's eyes on me every time I moved through the crowd. The way they watched me, waiting for me to fold, to give in to their demands. I glanced around, feeling suddenly very alone in a room full of people. Everyone was laughing, talking, dancing, but not me. I was trapped in this family drama, and no one even knew it. My grandmother Maggie was standing off to the side, watching quietly, as always. She wasn't part of the chaos, but I could tell she saw it all. Her eyes never left me. I could feel the strength of her gaze, like she was silently urging me to stand my ground. She knew the game my parents were playing better than anyone. As the night went on, I found myself standing near the dance floor, watching Rachel and her new husband spin around, lost in their joy. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. They had the kind of love I had always hoped for, the kind of bond that could withstand anything. But here I was, trying to hold on to something I couldn't even name. I had worked so hard for everything I had. The penthouse, the career, the life I had built. But none of that mattered to my parents. They didn't see me as an individual. They saw me as someone to take from. They had always been this way, but now it felt worse. It felt like they were willing to take everything, even the place that had been my sanctuary. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "Jenna, are you all right?" I turned to see Rachel standing beside me. She had an innocent look on her face, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She had no idea what was going on, but I could feel that she was sensing the tension in the air. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." "You've been doing a lot today," Rachel said, her tone soft. "Maybe you should take a break. I know Mom and Dad are. Well, they can be a lot sometimes." I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't quite reach my eyes. "You have no idea," I muttered under my breath. Rachel didn't catch it, but I could feel the weight of her words. I had always been the strong one in the family, the one who could handle anything. But this was different. This wasn't just another family squabble. This was betrayal, plain and simple, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. As the night wore on, I found myself slipping away from the party. I needed air. I needed space. I walked out onto the balcony of the venue, the cool night air hitting my skin. It felt like a small relief. I stood there for a moment, taking in the view of the city below. The lights, the movement, the hustle and bustle of the world going on without a care. It felt so far removed from the chaos I was living in. I thought about Maggie, about how she had always been the one to speak the truth, even when it wasn't easy. She had always been the one to stand up to my parents when no one else could. And now, I was in the same position. I had to stand up for myself, to take control of my life. But how? How could I fight back when my own family was trying to tear me down? As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a soft voice behind me. "I'm sorry about earlier." I turned to see Maggie standing there, her weathered face calm, but with an understanding in her eyes. "I know they're asking too much," she said. "But you have to remember, Jenna, they've always taken. They've never stopped to think about what they've left you with." "I don't know what to do, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. They don't see me. They don't care about anything but themselves." Maggie stepped closer, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. "You don't have to fight them directly," she said softly. "Sometimes, silence is the loudest weapon. Let them think they're in control, and then take it all back when they least expect it." I looked at her, not fully understanding, but feeling the truth in her words. Maybe that's what I needed to do. Not fight them head on, but let them make their moves, and then turn the tables when the time was right. Maggie was right. I didn't have to give in. I didn't have to let them take what was mine. And I didn't have to do it alone. As I stood there with Maggie, I realized something. I wasn't the weak, naive daughter they thought I was. I had strength inside me, and I was going to make sure they knew it. As the days passed, the reality of what had happened at the wedding started to settle in. I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents had crossed a line, but I also knew I wasn't ready to confront them directly. Instead, I began to retreat into myself, taking comfort in the quiet moments of the day. Each time I thought of the penthouse, my anger grew a little more, but so did my resolve. I couldn't let them think they could just take from me whenever they felt like it. I had worked hard for everything I had, and it was time I started standing up for myself. My grandmother's advice kept running through my mind. Sometimes, silence is the loudest weapon. It wasn't about arguing with them or raising my voice. It was about letting them make their move first and then turning the tables. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I knew I couldn't just let this go. I spent the next few days thinking about my options. I could feel the tension building with each phone call I had with my parents. They tried to make small talk, asking about my work, but their underlying tone was always the same, demanding, entitled. Every conversation left me feeling more drained than the last. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the city. The quiet streets felt like the perfect escape from everything that had been weighing on me. As I walked, I started to wonder how my life had come to this. How had I allowed my parents to treat me this way for so long? Why had I always been the one to give in, to let them walk all over me? It was like I had been living in a fog, too afraid to see the truth. I thought about Rachel and the wedding. She had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. She had been caught up in her own world, her new life with her husband. But I couldn't ignore the fact that this was also her wedding, and my parents were willing to ruin it for their own gain. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. But then, in the midst of my anger, I felt something shift inside me. A calmness. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was done letting them control me. When I returned home, I found a message from Maggie. "Come over. I think it's time we have a talk." I smiled at the message. Maggie always knew when I needed her, even when I didn't say a word. I made my way to her house that evening, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. When I arrived, Maggie greeted me with her usual warmth, but there was a glint in her eyes that told me she knew exactly what was on my mind. "Sit down, Jenna. We need to get to the bottom of this," she said, leading me into the living room. Maggie had always been the rock of our family. She had lived through her own share of struggles, and yet she never seemed shaken. I had always admired her strength, and tonight, I needed it more than ever. As I sat down, Maggie poured us both a cup of tea, her movements calm and measured. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice steady. "But you don't have to do this alone." I nodded, taking in her words. "I'm just so tired of them treating me like this, Grandma. I've given them everything, and they still want more. It's never enough for them." Maggie sighed, setting her cup down. "They'll never stop taking. But you don't have to keep giving. You need to put yourself first, Jenna. You need to take back control." Her words resonated deeply with me. For so long, I had lived my life trying to please my parents, trying to be the good daughter. But at what cost? I had given up so much of myself, so much of my time and energy, only to be treated like a resource, something to be used and discarded when it was no longer convenient. Maggie was right. I couldn't let this go on. "How do I do it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do I stand up to them without losing everything?" Maggie looked at me, her eyes soft but filled with determination. "You don't have to fight them head on. You're smarter than that. You're going to make them think they've won. And then, when they least expect it, you'll take it all back." Her plan was simple, but it felt right. Maggie had always known how to outsmart the people who tried to take advantage of her. And now, she was teaching me how to do the same. Over the next few days, I prepared. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not Rachel, not even my parents. I needed them to think I was still the same passive, obedient daughter. I needed them to believe that they could keep pushing me around. But inside, I was ready. I had already started putting Maggie's plan into motion. It was time for me to take back what was mine. As the days passed, I watched my parents grow more comfortable in their assumption that I would just let them have their way. They began asking more directly about the penthouse, subtly trying to guilt me into saying yes. Each time they did, I remained calm, giving them nothing. I wanted them to think I was weak, that I would give in eventually. But they were wrong. I wasn't weak. I was just waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, it would be the last time they ever tried to take from me. The next few days felt like a slow burn, each passing moment stretching out longer than the last. My parents' persistent inquiries about the penthouse continued, but I never gave them an inch. I could feel the weight of their expectations growing heavier, but I also knew I was getting closer to the moment when I would finally take control. They were growing impatient, and I could tell they were starting to doubt that I would ever give in. I was playing my part perfectly, keeping up the facade of the quiet, obedient daughter. But inside, something was shifting. I was becoming more certain of the path I needed to take. I couldn't let them take advantage of me anymore. It wasn't just about the penthouse anymore. It was about my dignity, my self-respect, and taking back the life I had worked so hard to build. That morning, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was sweeter than usual, almost too sweet. "Jenna, sweetheart, we've been talking about the penthouse again, and we really think it's the best option for all of us. You know, We could make it work for the family. It would be a great place to stay during the transition. I could hear the subtle manipulation in her voice, the way she tried to soften the demand with words like family and transition. It was a classic move. They always try to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. But not this time. I took a deep breath and kept my voice calm, even though inside I was seething. Mom, I've already told you I'm not comfortable with that arrangement. I've worked hard for that place. It's mine, and I'm not going to give it up. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slight shift in her tone. Well, if that's how you feel, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. But you have to understand, we're family. We thought you'd want to help. I am helping, I replied firmly, by saying no. This isn't about family. This is about you trying to take something from me, and I won't allow it. I could hear her muttering something under her breath, but I didn't let it faze me. I had said what needed to be said. It wasn't the reaction she wanted, but it was the truth. After I hung up, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done the right thing. But I knew this was just the beginning. My parents wouldn't back off easily. They never did, but I had learned from Maggie. I didn't need to fight them head on. I just had to wait for the right moment. That evening, I met with Maggie again. She could sense the change in me, the newfound determination in my voice. You did good, Jenna, she said with a nod. But this isn't over. They won't let it go that easily. You need to be prepared. I nodded, already knowing what she meant. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now it felt like the time was finally here. What do I do next? I asked. Maggie's eyes gleamed with a knowing look. You let them think they've won. Let them push. Let them make their demands. And when they think they've worn you down, that's when you strike. That's when you take it all back. I could see the wisdom in her words, but I also knew this wouldn't be easy. My parents had always been good at playing the long game, at wearing people down until they gave in. But I wasn't the same person I had been before. I had learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment. And that moment was coming soon. Over the next few days, I played my part, letting my parents continue their attempts to manipulate me. They kept calling, kept pressuring, but I didn't budge. I knew that the more they pushed, the closer I was to making my move. I couldn't let them take anything more from me. And then, one evening, I received a text from my mother. It was simple, just a few words, but it was the tipping point I had been waiting for. We've decided to take the penthouse anyway. We'll be there next week. I knew then that it was time. They had made their move, and now it was my turn. I smiled to myself, knowing exactly what I had to do. The game had begun, and this time, I was in control. It was time to turn the tables. The next day, I called Maggie. It's time, I said simply. Let's do this. She didn't ask any more questions. She knew exactly what I meant. I had already put my plan into motion. The penthouse wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. And I wasn't going to let my parents take it. Not now. Not ever. The next few days felt like a countdown, each moment passing with more tension than the last. My parents were getting more insistent with their demands about the penthouse. Each phone call, each message, each subtle pressure adding to the weight of the situation. But I held steady, not letting their words break my resolve. I could feel them growing frustrated, but I knew this was part of the plan. They had no idea what was coming. It was all leading up to this moment. As the week went on, I spent more time with Maggie, going over the steps of my plan. I was preparing for the final move, but it wasn't just about the penthouse anymore. It was about reclaiming my power, my independence, and my life. My parents had always treated me like I was beneath them, like I existed to serve their needs. But no more. I wasn't just going to let them take what was mine without a fight. Maggie had taught me well. I had learned to wait, to let them think they had control, and to strike when they least expected it. And now, the time had come. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. We'll be there tomorrow to take the keys to the penthouse. Don't make this difficult. I read the message, feeling the anger rise within me. They thought they had me cornered, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I had already made my move. I called Maggie that night, my voice steady. It's time, I said simply. Tomorrow, we end this. Maggie didn't ask any questions. She knew exactly what I meant. I had already set everything up. The next morning, I prepared myself for what was about to unfold. I knew my parents would come, expecting me to fold, expecting me to hand over the penthouse without a fight. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I was going to make them understand that I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was done being their doormat. At noon, I received a knock on the door. I knew it was them. I opened it slowly, not showing any emotion, just the calm exterior I had been practicing for days. My mother stood there, her smile too wide, her eyes too eager. "Jenna," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've come for the keys. You know, it's really the best thing for the family." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I just looked at her, taking in the way she was standing there, expecting me to hand over my home like it was a trivial request. I had given them everything for so long, but this time, I wasn't going to give in. I stepped aside, letting them into the apartment. My father walked in behind my mother, his expression one of barely contained impatience. "We really don't have all day, Jenna," he said, his tone cold and dismissive. I didn't flinch. I didn't let his words rattle me. "You're right," I said calmly, stepping toward the door of the study where the keys were kept. But instead of going straight for the keys, I turned to face them, my voice steady but filled with an underlying strength. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine without consequences?" I asked. My mother blinked, surprised by my sudden shift in tone. "Jenna, what are you talking about?" she asked, trying to play it off. "We're just here for the penthouse. It's no big deal." "No," I said firmly. "It is a big deal. You've taken everything from me for years. You've always treated me like I don't matter, like I'm just here to give and give while you take. But this time, I'm not giving you anything. Not my penthouse, not my life. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My parents looked at each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. But there was no going back now. I could feel the shift in the room, the power dynamic tilting in my favor. My mother's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Jenna," she said, her voice low and cold. "You're going to regret this." But I stood my ground, not flinching. "No, I won't," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I'm finally doing what I should have done a long time ago. I'm taking control of my life. And you can't have it." The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, stunned by the turn of events. Then, my father spoke, his voice tinged with frustration. "You really think you can stand up to us? You think this is over?" I took a deep breath, my mind clear and focused. "It is over," I said calmly. "You've had your time. Now it's mine." With that, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them standing there. I could hear their footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. When I stepped outside, I could feel the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the penthouse. It was about reclaiming my life, my autonomy, and my self-worth. And no one was going to take that away from me again. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity, as if the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much I had been carrying until that moment. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I had finally done it. I had stood up for myself, and it was more empowering than I had ever imagined. The phone call came just as I was finishing my coffee. It was my father. His voice was sharp, a hint of anger cutting through the usual false sweetness. "Jenna, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you've gone too far," he said, his tone colder than I had ever heard it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I had prepared myself for this. I had prepared for their retaliation. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice calm and composed, though inside I could feel the adrenaline beginning to surge. "You think this is about the penthouse, don't you?" he said, almost laughing, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh you make when you know you've lost control. "It's not just about that, Jenna. This is about respect, about what you owe us. You think you can just walk away from everything we've done for you?" His words cut through me, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. "I owe you nothing," I said firmly. "Not anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if I had pushed too far. But then my father spoke again, his voice quieter, more controlled. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this will be the last time we ask for something?" I could hear the subtle threat in his words, but I wasn't afraid. I had already made my decision. "I'm done, Dad. I'm not your pawn anymore. I'm not going to let you control me, manipulate me, or take what's mine. Not anymore." He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing, his frustration mounting with each passing second. But I stood firm. I wasn't going to back down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice tight with anger. "You'll regret this, Jenna. You think you're in control, but you're not. You've made a mistake." And with that, he hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air, but I didn't let them affect me. I had made the right choice. I had taken control of my life. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. Later that day, I met with Maggie. I needed her more than ever. As soon as I walked into her house, I could see the concern in her eyes, but also something else, pride. She could see the change in me. She could see that I was no longer the same person who had always been too afraid to stand up for myself. "You did good, Jenna," she said, her voice warm and steady. "You've finally found your strength." I nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "It's not just about the penthouse anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's about everything they've taken from me. I'm done letting them control my life." Maggie smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You don't have to do this alone, Jenna. You have the strength to fight back, but you also have the wisdom to know when to step back." That's what they never understood. I smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for everything Maggie had taught me. She had been my rock through all of this, the one person who had always believed in me when no one else did. "I'm ready," I said, my voice more confident than I had ever heard it before. "I'm not going to let them take from me anymore." The days that followed were filled with small victories. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I focused on my career, on my future, on the things that truly mattered. My parents' attempts to manipulate me continued, but each time, I stood firm. They tried to guilt-trip me, tried to play the victim, but I didn't let it get to me. I was stronger than I had ever been. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. I realized that I didn't need their approval, their validation, or their permission to live my life. I was in control, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. And as the weeks went on, I began to understand something else. My parents had never really been in control. I had always been the one in charge. I had just forgotten. But now, I remembered. And nothing, not even them, could take that away from me. A month passed, and for the first time in years, my apartment felt peaceful. Not silent in a lonely way, but calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm finally moves on. I started noticing little things again. The way the morning sunlight reflected against the windows of the neighboring buildings. The soft hum of the coffee machine in my kitchen. The fact that I no longer jumped every time my phone buzzed. My parents still called occasionally, but their tone had changed. The confidence was gone now. The entitlement had cracks in it. They no longer sounded like people issuing commands. They sounded like people losing control. I had not blocked them. I wanted them to understand something very clearly. I was not hiding. I was not running away. I simply was not theirs to control anymore. One Saturday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Rachel. Her voice sounded hesitant, softer than usual. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I stared out the window for a moment before answering. "Okay." An hour later, she arrived at my penthouse carrying a small white bakery box in her hands. Lemon cake. My favorite. The same kind we used to eat together when we were children sitting at Grandma Maggie's kitchen table. Rachel stood awkwardly near the doorway like she was unsure whether she was welcome. I stepped aside silently and let her in. She looked around the apartment slowly, almost nervously. "It really is beautiful here," she whispered. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen and placed 2 plates on the counter. Rachel sat quietly while I cut the cake. The silence between us felt unfamiliar now. Heavy, careful, like both of us were afraid to touch old wounds. Finally, she looked down at her hands and spoke. "I did not know they were doing this to you." I paused. "You did not ask either." Her face tightened slightly. "I know." The honesty in her voice surprised me. Rachel had spent most of her life avoiding conflict. She always tried to smooth things over, pretend problems were misunderstandings instead of patterns. But some truths become too large to ignore forever. "Mom and Dad told me you were overreacting," she admitted quietly. "They said you became selfish after your promotion. They said the penthouse changed you." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "Did you believe them?" I asked. Rachel looked at me carefully. At first, maybe a little. But then I started noticing things. The way they talked about you when you were not there. The way they acted like everything you owned somehow belonged to them. She swallowed hard before continuing. I think I just did not want to admit it. I leaned back against the counter and folded my arms. Admit what? Rachel's eyes filled slowly with tears. She was trying very hard not to let fall. That they do not really see us as people. They see us as extensions of themselves. The room went quiet after that. The kind of silence that feels honest instead of uncomfortable. I looked at my sister sitting there in my kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, my anger softened slightly. Not toward my parents. Toward her. Rachel had spent years trapped in the same system I had. The difference was that I finally walked away from it. A few minutes later, Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "Grandma wanted me to give this to you," she said softly. I frowned slightly and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter from Maggie. Her elegant cursive stretched neatly across the page. "Jenna, if you are reading this, it means you finally remembered your worth. I always knew you would. Some people spend their lives confusing love with obedience. Real love does not demand sacrifice until nothing remains. Real family does not make you earn basic respect. Your parents learned long ago that guilt was easier than gratitude. But you are not responsible for carrying the emotional debts of other people forever." I stared at the letter quietly while emotion rose slowly in my chest. Maggie understood everything without needing long explanations. She always had. Rachel washed my face carefully before speaking again. "There is something else you should know." I looked up. "Dad is furious because Grandma changed her estate documents last week." My eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Rachel let out a nervous breath. "She removed them from controlling anything." I blinked slowly. "Everything is divided differently now." Grandma said she was tired of rewarding selfishness. I sat down slowly at the kitchen island, suddenly understanding why my parents' behavior had changed recently. It was not just about the penthouse anymore. They were realizing the consequences were bigger than they expected. Maggie had seen them clearly long before I did. And now she had quietly shifted the balance of power without ever raising her voice. Rachel gave a weak smile. Mom nearly lost her mind when she found out. I shook my head slowly, almost in disbelief. Grandma warned them for years. Rachel nodded. I know. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there together in the soft afternoon light, surrounded by the calm my parents had tried so hard to take from me. And suddenly I realized something important. Winning did not feel loud. It did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, peaceful, like finally being able to breathe normally again after years of holding your breath. The days after that moment felt like a shift, like I had stepped into a different version of my life, one where I wasn't constantly weighed down by my parents' demands. The phone call stopped coming in, and I knew it wasn't because they had given up. It was because they were figuring out how to regain control. But I didn't care anymore. I had done something I never thought I would be capable of. I had set boundaries, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had some say in my own future. I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I didn't need their approval or their constant interference. I had a life that I had worked hard to build, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The real shift, though, came when I realized something even bigger. I wasn't just standing up to my parents. I was standing up to all the years of conditioning, all the guilt trips, the manipulation, and the expectations. I was standing up to myself, to the version of me that had always been afraid of disappointing others, the version that had always been scared of making waves. I had spent too much of my life being the good daughter, the one who did what was expected of her, never questioning, never demanding anything in return. But now, I understood that I had a right to ask for what I needed, to expect the same respect I gave. Rachel came over again, a few days after the conversation with Maggie. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, the sunlight streaming in through the window, and I noticed her hesitation when she walked through the door. She didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she just stood there, her eyes scanning the apartment, as though seeing it for the first time. "You're really not going to give in, are you?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. I turned to face her, my heart a little lighter than it had been just a few months ago. "No," I replied simply. "I'm not." Rachel sighed and sat down across from me, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "I don't know how you do it," she said. "I've always admired how strong you are, but I never understood why you let them walk all over you for so long. Now I see it. Now I understand. You're not just fighting for the penthouse. You're fighting for yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on the external battle, the one with my parents, that I hadn't stopped to realize the internal struggle I had been fighting for years. I had been battling the fear of standing up for myself, the fear of losing family, of disappointing those I loved. But in this moment, I realized that fighting for myself was the only way I could truly be free. I smiled at Rachel, grateful for her understanding. I don't know if I ever would have done it without you, Grandma, or even you, I said, my voice soft. I think, for so long, I didn't believe I deserved to have a life that was mine. I thought I was supposed to give everything to them, to keep making them happy, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. You deserve so much more than that, Jenna. You deserve peace, respect, and a life where you get to choose. You've already taken the hardest step by setting boundaries, by saying no. That's more than most people will ever do. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. It's not easy, I admitted, but it's worth it. The next few weeks felt like a gradual shift toward a new version of myself. I started prioritizing my own needs, my own happiness. I took on new projects at work, signed up for yoga classes, and spent more time with friends who supported me without question. I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. I was finally living for me. It was freeing. My parents still tried to reach out, still tried to guilt-trip me into giving them what they wanted. But it didn't work. The more they pushed, the more I pushed back, calmly and firmly. I stopped feeling guilty for saying no. I stopped letting their voices dictate how I lived my life. And then, one day, I received a letter from them. It wasn't a text or a phone call, but a letter, written in my mother's familiar script. I almost didn't open it, thinking it would be another attempt to manipulate me, another letter full of guilt and anger. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside was a simple message. We understand. We were wrong to ask for more than you could give. We realize we pushed too far, and for that, we are sorry. We hope that one day we can find a way to rebuild our relationship, but we understand if that is not possible. I read the letter twice, processing their words. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a step. It was a recognition that they had gone too far, that they had taken from me for too long. It was more than I had expected. For the first time, I felt like my parents were seeing me as a person, not as an extension of their needs. I didn't know what the future held for our relationship. Maybe it would never go back to the way it was before. But I realized something important in that moment. I no longer needed them to define my worth. I was enough, just as I was. I smiled to myself, letting the letter slip from my hands. The past was the past, and I was moving forward. No more guilt. No more manipulation. I was free. It had been a few months since that final letter from my parents. Things had settled in a way I had never imagined. The quiet peace I now lived with was not just from the absence of constant pressure from my family, but from the realization that I had taken control of my life. I had always been the one who gave, who sacrificed, who put others first. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. I had started making decisions that were right for me, and it felt liberating. My relationship with Rachel had grown stronger. We talked more now, not just about family drama or obligations, but about our lives, our dreams, and the future. We laughed together about old memories, and for once, it didn't feel like a competition or a battle for approval. It felt like family should feel, supportive, real, and without the weight of expectations. One afternoon, I decided to visit Maggie. I needed her wisdom, her perspective, because I realized something. I had made it this far, but there were still questions I needed to answer. I had started this journey of taking control, but now I had to figure out what came next. Maggie greeted me with her usual quiet grace. There was something comforting about her presence. It was like being in the presence of someone who had seen it all, who had lived through struggles and victories, and knew how to live with dignity no matter what life threw at her. You look different, she said as we sat down. How are you feeling? I smiled a real smile. Stronger. More sure of myself. Maggie nodded. I knew you would get there, Jenna. But now, it's time for you to decide what kind of life you want. You've made a lot of changes, but the real work is in how you continue moving forward. I hadn't expected that. What do you mean? I asked. Maggie's eyes were thoughtful as she spoke. The first step is always the hardest. You've taken that step, but now you need to start living your life for you. Not just for your career, or for what your parents want? For you. I thought about that for a moment. It had been easy to make decisions based on the pressure I'd always felt from my parents. I had built my life around what they expected of me, what they wanted from me. But now, I didn't know what I wanted. I had taken my power back, but I had never truly asked myself what I wanted to do with it. Maggie seemed to read my thoughts. The next step is figuring out what you want, she said gently. What will make you truly happy? It was a question I hadn't considered. I had been so focused on surviving, on protecting myself from my parents, that I had forgotten to ask myself what would truly bring me joy. I had always done things because I felt I had to. I had worked hard, lived up to expectations, but I had never paused to think about my own dreams. That realization hit me like a wave. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write. I wanted to explore the world without the weight of obligations hanging over me. And more than anything, I wanted to stop living in fear of disappointing others. It was time to stop hiding from the world. I looked at Maggie, a sense of purpose beginning to form in my chest. I'm going to start doing the things I've always wanted to do. I'm going to take that trip I've always dreamed of. I'm going to write, even if it's just for myself at first. And I'm going to stop letting anyone define who I am. Maggie smiled, her eyes warm with pride. That's the spirit, Jenna. You've come so far, but this is just the beginning. It's time for you to live fully, without holding back. Her words settled in my heart like a quiet promise. I didn't know exactly where life would take me next, but I knew it would be my choice. I was no longer waiting for someone else to tell me what I should do. I was making my own path, and for the first time in years, it felt right. I stood up, ready to embrace the unknown. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered. I walked out of Maggie's house with a new sense of clarity. The world was full of possibilities, and for once, I wasn't afraid to face them. It was time for me to truly live, without fear, without guilt, and without holding myself back. And for the first time, I felt ready.